The untold story of the Acropolis, the monument that survived 2,500 years of war, explosions, and theft. Welcome. Today, I am going to tell you a story that will completely change how you see ancient Greece. You might have seen pictures of the Parthenon before. Maybe you know it as a symbol of democracy, Western civilization, or ancient Greek architecture. But today, I am going to tell you the real story. The story that goes far beyond white marble columns and philosophical ideals. Today, I'm going to tell you about a sacred hill that has been a temple, a treasury, a fortress, a church, a mosque, and an ammunition depot that exploded. I am going to tell you about treasures stolen in the dead of night, sculptures that were hacked off with saws, and a monument that has survived 2,500 years of continuous destruction, yet still stands as one of the most recognizable symbols in human history. The Acropolis is not just an ancient ruin, it is a survivor story, a tale of glory and devastation, of artistic genius and shameless theft, of religious transformation and military catastrophe. After listening to this, you will be shocked to know how this single rocky hill has witnessed the birth of democracy, been decorated with some of the most beautiful sculptures ever created, suffered one of history's worst archaeological crimes, and somehow still manages to inspire millions of visitors every single year. And this is not just a history lesson. This is a perfect story for your English listening practice, filled with drama, mystery, shocking revelations, and moments that will leave you breathless. So sit back, relax, and let me take you on a journey. A journey to Athens, to a limestone hill rising 150 meters above the city, where human civilization reached one of its highest points, and where it also revealed some of its darkest moments. Now, let's begin. The sacred rock, where gods and mortals met. To understand the Acropolis, we must go back over 3,400 years to the Bronze Age, long before classical Athens, before democracy, before philosophy. Imagine prehistoric Greece, a world of tribal kingdoms, Bronze Age warriors, and primitive fortifications. On a flat-topped limestone hill overlooking the Attic Plain, Mycenaean Greeks built a massive fortress around 1400 BCE. This was not yet the Acropolis of marble temples. This was a military stronghold with cyclopean walls, massive stones fitted together without mortar, so large that later Greeks believed only the mythical Cyclops could have moved them. Why this particular hill? Geography. The Acropolis rises 150 meters above sea level with steep cliffs on three sides, making it nearly impossible to attack. From the top, you can see for miles in all directions, the Aegean Sea to the east, the mountains to the north and west, and the rich agricultural plains below. This was the perfect defensive position. But more than that, ancient Greeks believed this hill was sacred, a place where the boundary between the mortal world and the divine realm was thin. According to Greek mythology, this hill was where Athena, goddess of wisdom and warfare, competed with Poseidon, god of the sea, for patronage of the city. Poseidon struck the rock with his trident and produced a spring of salt water. Athena struck the ground and produced an olive tree, a source of food, oil, and wood. The citizens chose Athena's gift, and the city became Athens. Whether you believe the myth or not, olive trees and the worship of Athena have been central to this location for over 3 millennia. For centuries, the Acropolis remained primarily a fortress and palace complex. Mycenaean kings ruled from here, protected by those massive walls. But then, around 1200 BCE, Bronze Age civilization collapsed across the Mediterranean. Palaces burned, trade routes failed, and Greece entered what historians call the Dark Ages. The Acropolis survived, but barely. The great palaces were destroyed, and for centuries the site was reduced to a simple fortified settlement. But darkness never lasts forever, and what emerged from these Dark Ages would change human civilization forever. The birth of democracy and the vision of Pericles. Fast forward to 508 BCE. Athens has transformed from a Bronze Age kingdom into something unprecedented in human history, a democracy. Not a perfect democracy by modern standards. Women couldn't vote, slaves had no rights, and foreign residents were excluded. But for the first time in recorded history, ordinary male citizens had a direct say in their government. They gathered in the Agora, the marketplace, to debate laws, vote on policies, and decide the fate of their city-state. This was revolutionary. During this period, the Acropolis began its transformation from fortress to sacred sanctuary. The old Mycenaean walls remained, but now temples started appearing. The Athenians built a temple to Athena in the late 6th century BCE, decorating it with colorful sculptures and paintings. The Acropolis was becoming a religious center, a place where citizens came to worship, make offerings, and participate in sacred festivals. But then disaster struck. In 480 BCE, the Persian Empire, the most powerful force in the ancient world, invaded Greece. The Persian king Xerxes led a massive army. Some ancient sources claim over 1 million soldiers, though modern historians estimate around 200,000. The Persians were unstoppable. They had conquered everything from India to Egypt. Greece, divided into small city-states constantly fighting each other, seemed doomed. The Athenians made a desperate decision. They evacuated their city, putting everyone, men, women, children, onto ships. They abandoned Athens to the Persians, gambling everything on a naval battle at Salamis, and they told the defenders remaining on the Acropolis to hold out as long as possible. The Persians arrived, surrounded the Acropolis, and demanded surrender. The Athenian defenders refused. For days, they held the sacred hill, raining arrows and stones down on the Persian army. But the outcome was inevitable. The Persians eventually broke through, slaughtered every defender, looted the treasures, and then did something unforgivable. They burned every temple, every statue, every sacred building on the Acropolis to the ground. When the Athenians returned after their stunning naval victory at Salamis and their final triumph at Plataea, they found their sacred hill in ruins. Everything was destroyed. The temples of their gods were blackened shells. The sculptures were smashed. The Acropolis, the spiritual heart of Athens, was devastated. The Athenians made a sacred vow. They would not rebuild the temples immediately. They would leave the ruins as they were, a reminder of Persian barbarity, until Greece was truly free. For 33 years, the burned temples remained, a scar on the Athenian landscape. But in 447 BCE, everything changed. A new leader emerged, Pericles, the most influential statesman in Athenian history. Pericles was a brilliant orator, a military commander, and a visionary. He looked at the ruined Acropolis and saw an opportunity. Athens had just become the leader of the Delian League, a confederation of Greek city-states formed to defend against Persia. Money was flowing into Athens from tribute paid by allied cities. Athens was becoming rich, powerful, and confident. Pericles proposed something audacious: rebuild the Acropolis not as it was, but better, grander, more magnificent than anything the ancient world had ever seen. He would create a monument to Athenian glory, to democracy, to Athena herself. He would build a temple so perfect, so beautiful, that it would stand as a testament to human achievement for all eternity. The conservative faction in Athens was outraged. They accused Pericles of stealing money from the Delian League treasury for Athenian vanity projects. They said the funds should be used for defense, not architecture. Pericles gave a response that still echoes through history. The Athenians are not obliged to give an account of how they spend the money to their allies, provided they fight the war for them and keep the Persians away. In other words, Athens was now an empire, and empires build monuments. The decision was made. The greatest building project in Greek history would begin. The Parthenon, perfection in marble. Pericles assembled the greatest architects and artists in the Greek world. The lead architect was Ictinus, a genius who understood not just how to build structures, but how to make them appear perfect to the human eye. The sculptor was Phidias, whose name would become synonymous with classical beauty. Together, they would create the Parthenon, a temple dedicated to Athena Parthenos, Athena the Virgin. Construction began in 447 BCE. The scale was breathtaking. The Parthenon would be built entirely from Pentelic marble, quarried from Mount Pentelicus about 16 kilometers from Athens. This marble is unique. It's pure white when first cut, but over time it develops a warm golden honey color due to iron content. Over 22,000 tons of marble would be needed. But here's what makes the Parthenon truly extraordinary. There is not a single straight line in the entire building. This sounds impossible, but it's true. The ancient Greeks understood that perfectly straight lines appear curved to the human eye due to optical illusions, so they compensated. The base of the Parthenon curves upward slightly in the center. The east and west ends are about 6 centimeters lower than the middle. The columns lean inward slightly. If you extended them upward, they would meet about 2.4 kilometers above the ground. The corner columns are slightly thicker than the others to compensate for the light behind them that would make them appear thinner. Every measurement, every angle, every proportion was carefully calculated to create the illusion of absolute perfection. The ratio of width to length, the spacing of columns, the height of the architrave, everything followed the golden ratio, the ancient Greek principle they believed created ideal beauty. The columns themselves are masterpieces. Each one is made of multiple marble drums stacked on top of each other, carved with vertical grooves, called flutes, that catch the light and create the illusion of movement. The Parthenon has 46 outer columns and 23 inner columns, each one weighing several tons. Moving these massive marble pieces up the Acropolis, lifting them into place with nothing but rope, wood, and human muscle, this was engineering genius. But the columns were just the beginning. Phidias and his workshop created sculptures that would become the standard of beauty for all Western art. The pediments, the triangular spaces at the east and west ends, were filled with sculptures depicting the birth of Athena and her contest with Poseidon. The metopes, the rectangular panels between the columns, showed scenes of Greeks defeating centaurs, Amazons, and Trojans, all symbolic of civilization triumphing over barbarism. And around the top of the inner chamber ran a continuous frieze, 160 meters long, showing the Pan-Athenian procession, the annual festival where all Athens came to honor Athena. These sculptures were not the white marble we see today. They were painted in vivid colors, red, blue, gold, and purple. The background of the metopes was bright red. The clothing on the figures was painted blue and gold. Bronze weapons and accessories adorned the statues. The Parthenon was a riot of color, a breathtaking sight that must have been overwhelming to ancient visitors. And inside the Parthenon, in the inner chamber called the Naos, stood Phidias's masterpiece, the Athena Parthenos statue. This statue was over 12 meters tall, built around a wooden frame, covered with 1,140 kilograms of pure gold for her clothing and armor, and ivory for her flesh. Her eyes were precious stones. In one hand she held a statue of Nike, the goddess of victory. In the other, a shield rested at her side, decorated with scenes of the battle between Greeks and Amazons. On her head sat a crown decorated with a sphinx and griffins. This was not just a statue. This was the ultimate representation of Athenian power, wealth, and divine favor. The Parthenon was completed in 438 BCE, though work on the sculptures continued until 432 BCE. It took 15 years and cost 469 silver talents, equivalent to over $100 million today. But when it was finished, it was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Visitors from across the Mediterranean came to Athens just to see it. It became the symbol of Greek civilization, of democracy, of human achievement at its peak. For 900 years, the Parthenon stood as a temple to Athena, the spiritual center of Athens and the Greek world. But empires fall, religions change, and nothing lasts forever. Transformation from temple to church to mosque. In 146 BCE, Rome conquered Greece. The Acropolis became part of the Roman Empire, but the Romans respected Greek culture and left the temples largely intact. In fact, Roman emperors and generals came to Athens to admire Greek art and philosophy. Some even added their own monuments to the Acropolis. The Parthenon remained a temple to Athena, though now in a Roman rather than Greek world. But then came Christianity. In 391 CE, the Roman Emperor Theodosius I banned all pagan worship throughout the empire. Overnight, temples that had functioned for nearly 1,000 years were closed. The priests were expelled, the sacrifices stopped, the sacred fires went out. The age of the Greek gods was over. The Athenians faced a choice: destroy the Parthenon as a pagan abomination, or convert it. They chose conversion. The Parthenon became a Christian church dedicated to the Virgin Mary, the Parthenos, Virgin, of the Christian faith, replacing the Parthenos of the Greek faith. This was symbolic and practical. Athena Parthenos became Mary the Virgin, wisdom and purity continuing under a new religion. To convert the Parthenon, the Christians had to modify it. They blocked up spaces between the columns, creating walls. They removed the eastern entrance and made the western end the main entrance, reversing the orientation of the building. They plastered over many of the pagan sculptures, particularly anything too explicitly showing Greek gods. The great statue of Athena Parthenos was removed, either destroyed or, according to some sources, taken to Constantinople, where it disappeared during the Crusades. But remarkably, the Christians left most of the building intact. The columns remained, the structure survived, and many of the sculptures were preserved under plaster rather than destroyed. For over 1,000 years, the Parthenon functioned as a church, witnessing the Byzantine Empire, the Crusades, and the late Middle Ages. Then, in 1458, Athens fell to the Ottoman Turks. The Ottoman conquerors had the same decision the Christians once faced: destroy or convert. They chose conversion. The Parthenon became a mosque. A minaret was added to the southwest corner, a tall tower from which the call to prayer would sound 5 times daily. The Christian altar was removed, and the building was reoriented once again to face Mecca. Islamic geometric decorations were added to some walls, though again much of the ancient structure was preserved. It's remarkable when you think about it. The Parthenon, built to honor a Greek goddess, served for 900 years as her temple, 1,000 years as a Christian church, and 250 years as a mosque. 3 religions, 2,000 years, 1 building. Each faith could have destroyed what came before, but instead they adapted it. The Parthenon survived because each successive culture recognized its magnificence and chose to preserve it, even while changing its purpose. For over 2,100 years, from 438 BCE to 1687 CE, the Parthenon stood relatively intact. Yes, it had been modified. Yes, some sculptures had been damaged or removed, but the building itself was still standing, still functional, still magnificent. Visitors in the 1600s described it as one of the most beautiful and best preserved monuments of the ancient world. And then, in one terrible night, everything changed. The explosion, the night the Parthenon died. September 26, 1687, Athens is under siege. The Venetian Republic, a Catholic maritime power from Italy, is at war with the Ottoman Empire. A Venetian army led by General Francesco Morosini has surrounded Athens, determined to capture the city from Turkish control. The Ottomans have retreated to the Acropolis, turning the ancient hilltop into a fortress once again, just as it had been 3,000 years earlier in Mycenaean times. But the Ottoman commander made a catastrophic decision. He decided to store gunpowder and ammunition inside the Parthenon. His reasoning was logical. The Parthenon was the strongest building on the Acropolis, with thick marble walls. Surely the Venetians, who were Europeans and Christians, would never fire on such a famous ancient monument. Surely they would respect this architectural treasure that belonged to all of Western civilization. He was wrong. General Morosini knew the Ottomans were storing ammunition in the Parthenon, and he made the decision to fire on it anyway. On the night of September 26th, Venetian artillery positioned on the Hill of the Muses, 300 meters away, began bombarding the Acropolis. Shell after shell arced through the darkness, crashing into the ancient buildings. The Venetian gunners aimed specifically at the Parthenon. And then it happened. A mortar shell crashed through the roof of the Parthenon and detonated the ammunition stored inside. The explosion was massive. Over 300 barrels of gunpowder ignited simultaneously. The blast could be heard for miles. The entire center of the Parthenon, the roof, the inner chamber, 14 columns, and much of the northern and southern walls simply disintegrated. Marble blocks weighing tons were thrown hundreds of meters. The sculptures that survived 2,100 years of religious transformation were blown to pieces. Over 300 people who had taken shelter inside the Parthenon, including women and children, were killed instantly. When the smoke cleared, the Parthenon was a ruin. The building that had stood for 2,100 years, that had been a temple, a church, and a mosque, that survived earthquakes, religious changes, and political upheavals, was destroyed in a single night because of gunpowder and a military decision. But wait, the story gets worse. After the Ottomans surrendered, General Morosini entered the Acropolis. He looked at the destruction his artillery had caused and apparently felt no remorse. Instead, he decided to take souvenirs. He attempted to remove the sculptures from the western pediment, the scene of Athena and Poseidon's contest. His workers tried to lower the massive marble figures using ropes and pulleys, but they didn't understand how the ancient Greeks had balanced these sculptures. The ropes broke, the sculptures crashed to the ground and shattered into hundreds of pieces. Morosini gave up and left Athens shortly afterward, taking what pieces he could carry. The Venetians abandoned the city after less than a year, leaving behind a devastated Acropolis and a ruined Parthenon. The explosion of 1687 is considered one of the greatest cultural catastrophes in history, a 2,100-year-old architectural masterpiece destroyed not by time or nature, but by human violence and stupidity. For the next 130 years, the Parthenon remained a shattered ruin. Locals used the fallen marble as building material for houses. Pieces of ancient sculptures were ground up to make lime. The Acropolis became a wasteland, a shadow of its former glory, tragic evidence of what war can destroy. But somehow, the story was about to get even worse. The Elgin Marbles, the greatest theft in archaeological history. In 1799, a Scottish nobleman named Thomas Bruce, the 7th Earl of Elgin, was appointed British ambassador to the Ottoman Empire. Elgin had a passion for classical art and was appalled by the state of the Acropolis. He decided he would preserve Greek art by removing it from Athens and taking it to Britain, where it would be safe from further destruction and could be studied by scholars. This is how Elgin framed his actions, as rescue and preservation. But let's be clear about what actually happened. It was theft, plain and simple. Elgin obtained a controversial permit from the Ottoman authorities, a permit whose legitimacy is still debated because the original document no longer exists and the exact wording is disputed. Armed with this questionable permission, Elgin hired a team of workers and began removing sculptures from the Parthenon. But Elgin didn't just pick up fallen pieces from the ground. His workers used saws, chisels, and brute force to hack sculptures off the building itself. They cut the metopes out of the structure. They sawed through the frieze, removing a 75-meter section. They pried sculptures from the pediments. The damage they caused was extensive. They weakened the already damaged structure, broke pieces that had survived the explosion, and destroyed context that would have helped scholars understand how the sculptures were arranged. For 10 years, from 1801 to 1810, Elgin's team stripped the Parthenon of its finest sculptures. They packed over 75 meters of the frieze, 15 metopes, 17 pediment figures, and various other architectural pieces into wooden crates. These crates were loaded onto ships and sent to Britain. One ship sank off the coast of Greece. The sculptures were later recovered in one of history's first underwater salvage operations. The removal was controversial even at the time. Many people, including Lord Byron, the famous British poet, condemned Elgin's actions. Byron called Elgin a vandal and wrote bitter poetry comparing him to the barbarians who had destroyed ancient monuments. Greek locals were upset but powerless. They were living under Ottoman occupation and had no authority to stop a British lord with official permits. Elgin eventually transported about half of the Parthenon's surviving sculptures to Britain. He initially planned to decorate his Scottish mansion with them, but he ran into financial trouble and sold the entire collection to the British government for £35,000 in 1816, far less than he had spent acquiring them. The British Museum placed them on display, where they remain to this day. The British Museum calls them the Elgin Marbles, or the Parthenon sculptures. Greece calls them stolen property and has been demanding their return for over 200 years. The British Museum argues they were legally acquired, that they're better preserved in London than they would be in Athens, and that they belong to world heritage, not just Greece. Greece argues they were taken during foreign occupation, removed without Greek consent, and belong in their country of origin. This controversy continues today. Every few years, Greece officially requests the return of the sculptures. Every time, the British Museum refuses. The debate has become one of the most famous disputes in the art world. Who owns ancient artifacts? The culture that created them, or the museums that house them? Should art taken during colonial periods be returned, or does it belong to humanity and should stay where it's accessible to the most people? There's no easy answer, but what's undeniable is that the Parthenon today is incomplete. When you visit Athens and stand on the Acropolis, you're looking at a building that's missing half its sculptures. The finest pieces are in London, 2,500 kilometers away, removed not by time or accident, but by a British lord with a saw and questionable paperwork. Restoration, the modern struggle to save the Acropolis. For most of the 19th and early 20th centuries, the Acropolis remained a picturesque ruin, romantic in its decay, popular with tourists, but structurally unstable and continuing to deteriorate. The Greek government made some attempts at stabilization, but resources were limited, especially after World War I, World War II, and the Greek Civil War. But by the 1970s, the situation was becoming critical. Air pollution from Athens' cars and industries was eating away at the marble. The Pentelique marble, which had survived 2,400 years, was now dissolving in acid rain produced by modern pollution. The iron clamps that had been used in earlier restoration efforts were rusting, expanding, and cracking the marble, and the sheer number of tourists, millions annually, was causing physical wear on the ancient stones. In 1975, the Greek government launched an ambitious restoration project that continues to this day. This is not a simple repair job. This is one of the most complex archaeological engineering projects ever undertaken. The goal is not to rebuild the Parthenon to its original condition, but to stabilize it, preserve what remains, and make it safe for future generations. The challenges are enormous. Every piece of marble on the Acropolis has to be documented, measured, and analyzed. Many blocks have fallen from their original positions and lie scattered around the site. The restoration team has to figure out where each piece originally came from. It's like solving a massive three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle where most of the pieces are missing and the remaining pieces are damaged. Modern technology helps. Laser scanning creates precise 3D models of every block. Computer programs analyze thousands of possible positions to find where each piece fits. New marble from the same ancient quarries is used to fill gaps, but it's clearly marked so future archaeologists can distinguish original ancient material from modern additions. Titanium clamps replace the rusting iron ones. Titanium doesn't rust and won't damage the marble. The work is painstakingly slow. Skilled craftsmen work with traditional marble working techniques passed down for generations. They split the marble along its natural grain, shape it with chisels, polish it with abrasives. In 50 years of work, they've reassembled sections of the Parthenon's colonnade, stabilized the walls, and created a better understanding of how the original building was constructed. But here's the controversial part. Some of the restoration has been criticized as going too far. Purists argue that ruins should be left as ruins, that the romantic decay is part of the monument's story. Others say the restoration is too conservative, that more could be done to help visitors understand what the original buildings looked like. It's a constant balance between preservation and interpretation, between keeping things authentic and making them accessible. Today, when you visit the Acropolis, you see this restoration work everywhere. There are steel frameworks supporting walls, cranes lifting marble blocks, scaffolding covering sections of the Parthenon. It's a construction site and has been for decades. Some tourists complain they can't get perfect photographs, but the alternative is watching the Parthenon slowly collapse into rubble. And the work continues. Current estimates suggest the restoration project won't be finished until 2030 at the earliest, over 50 years of work to repair damage caused by 2,500 years of history, and particularly by the explosion of 1687 and the pollution of the 20th century. The Acropolis today: symbol, survivor, and warning. Today, the Acropolis receives over 3 million visitors annually, making it one of the most visited archaeological sites in the world. Tourists from every country climb the ancient stone path, pass through the propylaea, the monumental gateway, and emerge onto the sacred plateau where the Parthenon dominates the skyline. Even in its damaged state, even with scaffolding and cranes, even missing half its sculptures, the Parthenon is breathtaking. What makes the Acropolis so powerful is not just its beauty, but what it represents. This is where democracy was born, not perfect democracy, but the first experiment in citizens governing themselves. This is where philosophy flourished. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle all walked these streets. This is where drama was invented. The plays of Sophocles and Euripides were performed at the theater of Dionysus on the southern slope of the Acropolis. This is where Western civilization, for better or worse, began to take the form we recognize today. But the Acropolis is also a warning. It shows us what war destroys, what ignorance damages, what greed steals. The explosion of 1687 proved that military necessity can override cultural value. The Elgin Marbles controversy proved that colonial powers took what they wanted without consent. The 20th century pollution damage proved that progress can destroy what it claims to admire. And yet, the Acropolis survives. Damaged, incomplete, controversial, but surviving. The Parthenon stands as a monument to human achievement and human failure, to artistic genius and military stupidity, to preservation and destruction all at once. When you stand on the Acropolis today and look out over Athens, you're seeing what ancient Athenians saw: the mountains of Attica, the Aegean Sea glinting in the distance, the city spreading below. The view hasn't changed, and in that moment, you feel the connection across 2,500 years. The people who built this place, who worshipped here, who debated democracy in the agora below, who watched plays and made sacrifices and lived their lives, they stood where you're standing, saw what you're seeing. The Acropolis teaches us that nothing lasts forever in its original form, but that doesn't mean preservation is pointless. It teaches us that monuments survive not because they're indestructible, but because people choose to save them. It teaches us that heritage belongs to everyone, but that doesn't resolve who should control it. And it teaches us that the past is never really past. It's always present, always influencing us, always asking us to decide what's worth saving and what we're willing to sacrifice. This is the story of the Acropolis, a sacred hill that became a fortress, a temple complex that survived religious transformations, a symbol of democracy that witnessed tyranny, an architectural masterpiece that was blown up from military expedients, a treasure that was partially stolen, and a ruin that humanity is now desperately trying to preserve. It has survived 2,500 years of history, and if we continue to care for it, it will survive 2,500 more. The Acropolis of Athens is not just ancient stones and damaged sculptures. It is a mirror reflecting our values, our failures, our ambitions, and our eternal struggle to preserve beauty in a world that seems determined to destroy it. That is why the Acropolis matters. That is why it will live forever.